Find the girl from tonight. Before they do. I didn't know those words were being spoken about me while I stood under a flickering streetlight on West 48th Street, my breath turning to fog in the January air. It was 11 degrees, the kind of cold that slides through wool and settles into your bones, and I was 3 blocks from my apartment, counting tips in my head and calculating whether I could afford groceries and my Con Edison bill in the same week. My shift at the diner had run late, again. The coffee machine broke, a regular got sick, and somehow I was the one wiping down booths at 1:17 a.m., my feet aching inside shoes that had seen better years. I remember thinking that if I walked faster, I could beat the wind tunneling between the buildings. That was when I saw him. At first, he was just a shape near the curb, half-shadowed beside a black SUV with tinted windows so dark they reflected the city back at itself. A little boy stood a few feet away from the open rear door, no coat, just a thin sweater and sneakers too light for winter, his small hands clenched at his sides like he was trying not to cry. The driver's door was open too, but no one was inside. Traffic hummed in the distance, yellow cabs streaking by, headlights sliding across wet pavement. I should have kept walking. That's what people do in Manhattan at that hour. You mind your business. You survive. But the boy's shoulders were shaking. Not dramatically. Not loud. Just enough that I noticed. Hey, I called gently, stepping closer, keeping my voice soft the way I did with nervous customers and stray dogs. You okay? He looked up at me with wide gray eyes that didn't match the city's hardness. He couldn't have been older than 6. I shrugged off my coat before I could talk myself out of it and wrapped it around his shoulders. The cold hit me instantly, sharp and punishing, but he relaxed a fraction, like warmth was something he hadn't expected. Where's your mom or dad? I asked. He didn't answer. He just glanced toward the SUV, then back at me, uncertainty flickering across his face. That's when I felt it. The shift in the air, the quiet, conversations on the sidewalk thinning out, the subtle awareness that we were no longer alone. I turned slowly and saw him stepping out from the shadow between 2 buildings, tall, composed, dressed in a dark overcoat tailored so precisely it looked sculpted onto him. He moved without rushing, yet every step felt deliberate, controlled. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that belonged on a magazine cover, but it was his eyes that held me in place, steady, assessing, almost silver under the streetlight. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked relieved. Ethan, he said quietly, and the boy exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. The man's gaze shifted to me then, lingering just long enough to make my pulse stumble. Not inappropriate, not invasive, just aware, completely aware. Thank you, he said, his voice low, smooth, unmistakably American with the faintest trace of something older beneath it. I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious in my diner uniform and borrowed bravery. He looked cold. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Most people would have kept walking. I handed the boy back his coat and stepped away, already regretting how exposed I felt without it. Most people are tired, I replied. I just couldn't. For a second, something unreadable passed through his expression. Not surprise. Not amusement. Something deeper. As he guided Ethan gently toward the SUV, another vehicle pulled up behind it, identical, black and silent. I noticed the way the driver inside watched the sidewalk without staring. I noticed the way the street seemed to give this man space without anyone being told to move. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands there and the world adjusts. I started walking again, hugging my arms around myself, pretending my heart wasn't racing. I told myself it was nothing. Just a father and his son. Just a cold night. But halfway down the block, I felt it again, that awareness. I glanced over my shoulder. He was still there, watching me. Not in a way that frightened me. In a way that decided something. And though I didn't know his name yet, I would soon learn that when Dominic Hale chose something, the city itself rearranged to make room for it. And that night, without meaning to, I had stepped directly into his world simply because I chose kindness when it was easier not to. I told myself, I would never see him again. Manhattan is full of almost moments, almost conversations, almost strangers who brush against your life and disappear before you can attach meaning to them. By the time I reached my apartment building, my fingers were numb and my thoughts had settled into something rational. A wealthy father, a scared child, a cold night. That was all. I climbed the 4 flights to my walk-up, the radiator clanking in protest as soon as I pushed open the door, and I stood there for a second in the dark, letting the silence wrap around me. I did not own much. A thrift store couch, a narrow bed pressed against the brick wall, a small kitchen table that doubled as my desk. But it was mine. No tinted windows. No silent drivers watching from behind glass. Just me. I slept lightly, the way I always do after a late shift, and when my alarm rang at 6:30 in the morning, the sky outside my window was still bruised with early dawn. I had just poured cereal into a chipped bowl when my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. I frowned. I had not scheduled anything. My rent was not due for another week. I opened the app and felt my breath hitch. The past due balance I had been dreading, the late fee I had been calculating in my head for days, was gone. Paid. Not partially. Not adjusted. Paid in full. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to correct itself. It did not. I checked the transaction details. Anonymous payment. No name. No memo. Just cleared. My heart began to pound in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Coincidence, I told myself. Maybe my landlord had applied something incorrectly before. Maybe it was an accounting error. I grabbed my coat and headed downstairs, knocking on Mrs. Donnelly's door on the first floor. She opened it with curlers in her hair and suspicion in her eyes. Morning, Claire. Something wrong with the pipes again? Did you apply a credit to my rent? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked at me. Credit? No. Someone wired it this morning. Fancy transfer too. Cleared instantly. She tilted her head. You have a secret admirer I should know about. My stomach dropped. I thanked her and climbed back upstairs, the hallway suddenly feeling narrower than it had an hour ago. By the time I reached the diner for my morning shift, I had almost convinced myself it was charity from the city, some delayed assistance program. That illusion lasted exactly 12 minutes. I was refilling sugar caddies when Marco, the manager, called my name from across the counter. Claire, someone left this for you. He held up a small white envelope. Thick paper. Expensive. Not the kind sold in bulk at a drugstore. My name was written across the front in precise, controlled handwriting. I wiped my hands on my apron before taking it. Inside was a single card. No decoration. No signature. Just a line printed in simple black ink. Kindness should never cost you rent. I did not need a signature. I could see his face as clearly as if he were standing across the counter. Dominic Hale. I did not know how I knew his last name yet, but it settled in my mind with certainty. Power does not introduce itself loudly. It leaves evidence. I folded the card carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Marco was watching me with raised brows. Friend of yours? Not exactly, I said. The bell above the diner door chimed. I felt it before I saw him. The subtle shift. The quiet recalibration of the room. Conversations softened. Even the regular at booth 3 paused mid-sentence. Dominic stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat and a navy suit that looked custom cut. He did not glance around as if seeking approval. He simply entered, and the space adjusted to him. He spotted me immediately. Of course he did. His eyes held mine with calm precision, not possessive, not smiling, just certain. He crossed the black and white tiled floor without hurry. I became acutely aware of my ponytail, my apron, the faint smell of coffee clinging to my sleeves. Good morning, Claire, he said, as if we were old acquaintances meeting by chance. Hearing my name in his voice made my pulse jump. How do you know my name? I asked quietly. I make it my business to know the names of people who help my son. He took a seat at the counter, posture straight, presence contained but unmistakable. Coffee. I managed. Black. I poured it with hands that refused to tremble. He watched me the way someone studies a chessboard. Not threatening. Strategic. You did not have to pay my rent, I said finally. Direct. I needed to be direct. You did not have to give your coat to a child in 11-degree weather, he replied evenly. Yet you did. I set the pot down. That does not mean you get to rearrange my life. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Or surprise. I am not rearranging your life, he said. I am ensuring it is not inconvenienced because of me. I was not inconvenienced, I said. I was cold. A small pause. Then, softer, and I would do it again. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. That is exactly what concerns me. I frowned. Why? He leaned forward just enough that his voice lowered, though no one around us was listening. Because the world you stepped into last night does not reward people who cannot walk away. My heartbeat stumbled. I did not step into anything. He held my gaze. Steady. Unblinking. Claire, he said quietly, you already have. The air between us did not feel hostile. It felt inevitable. I stood there behind the counter, coffee pot still warm in my hand, and realized that Dominic Hale was not a man who exaggerated. When he said I had stepped into something, he believed it. And the unsettling part was that he did not look pleased about it. He looked concerned. I folded my arms, more to steady myself than to appear defiant. You are making it sound dramatic, I said. I gave your son my coat. That is not a declaration of war. A faint shift touched his expression, almost amusement, but it vanished quickly. You witnessed a situation that was not meant for public attention, he replied. You stood next to my vehicle. You spoke to my son. You were seen. The word seen settled heavily in my chest. Seen by who? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his coffee, took a measured sip, and set the cup down with deliberate calm. By people who calculate risk differently than you do. I swallowed. The diner suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, every window a frame. Are you saying someone is going to come after me? My voice stayed steady, but I felt the tremor beneath it. I am saying, he corrected evenly, that I do not allow unnecessary variables. I am not a variable. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. His eyes sharpened, not in anger, but in focus. Exactly. Silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. He studied me, as if confirming something he had already suspected. You refused money, he said quietly. You refused a driver this morning. My brows knit together. A driver? The black sedan that waited outside your building for 30 minutes, he clarified. You left through the side entrance instead. A chill ran down my spine. You had someone watching my apartment? He did not look ashamed. Ensuring you arrived safely at work. I let out a slow breath. You do not get to decide what is safe for me. I do, he said, not raised, not aggressive, simply certain. The certainty unsettled me more than a threat ever could have. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You do not own my safety. For a fraction of a second, something softened in his gaze. Claire, he said, and my name in his voice felt less like possession and more like recognition. If this were about ownership, you would not be standing here arguing with me. That gave me pause. He was right. There was no force in his tone, no demand, only an unspoken promise of protection that felt both reassuring and infuriating. I do not want protection, I said. I want normal. His jaw tightened slightly. Normal is relative. I almost laughed. Not in my world. Your world, he repeated, as if testing the phrase. He glanced around the diner, at the cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus. You believe this is separate from mine. It is. He met my eyes again, steady and unyielding. It is not. The bell above the door chimed as two men in suits stepped inside. They did not look at me. They did not speak. They simply took seats at a corner booth and opened newspapers they did not read. I noticed the way their posture mirrored awareness. I noticed the way Dominic did not turn around, yet seemed fully conscious of their presence. You brought them? I asked quietly. They insisted, he replied. On what? On making sure nothing unexpected happens. I felt my pulse begin to climb again. This is exactly what I mean. You walk in and suddenly my diner has security. He held my gaze. They are not here for you. Then who? A small pause. For me. That answer landed differently. It reframed everything. The men were not guarding me from strangers. They were guarding him from the world. Which meant the world he lived in required guarding. Dominic, I said carefully, testing his name for the first time. It felt powerful on my tongue. His attention sharpened instantly. If you are in danger, I continued, then why come here? His eyes did not waver. Because you are. The simplicity of it stole my next breath. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just fact. I stared at him, trying to decide whether to feel protected or pulled under. You are overreacting, I whispered, though I was no longer sure that was true. He leaned back slightly, giving me space instead of taking it. I hope so, he said quietly. For your sake. And for the first time since that cold night, I began to understand that kindness had a cost I had never calculated, and Dominic Hale had already decided he would be the one to pay it. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of clinking plates and half-heard conversations, but I felt the difference in the room long after Dominic finished his coffee. He did not linger unnecessarily. He stood, adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket, and placed a few bills on the counter that far exceeded the price of a single cup. "I will not interfere with your routine," he said quietly before leaving, "but I will not ignore risk." Then he walked out, and the two men at the corner booth followed 10 seconds later, newspapers folded with identical precision. The bell above the door chimed 3 times in succession, and just like that, the diner returned to normal. Or something that looked like it. I told myself that once he was gone, the tension would dissolve. It did not. By late afternoon, little things began to shift in ways that felt too coordinated to be coincidence. A man who had been loitering near the bus stop across the street for the past 3 days did not return. The broken streetlight outside the diner that had flickered for months was replaced before sunset. Even Marco noticed. "City finally doing their job," he muttered as he watched the maintenance truck drive away. I did not respond. When my shift ended at 4, I stepped outside with a strange awareness prickling across my skin. The sidewalk felt clearer, not emptier, just observed. I scanned the street instinctively and caught sight of a familiar black sedan parked half a block down. It was not blocking traffic. It was not obvious. It was simply there, waiting. I exhaled sharply and started walking in the opposite direction. If he thought I would accept the silent escort, he did not know me very well. I cut through a side street, then another, weaving toward the subway entrance instead of heading home. The city felt loud again, horns and sirens and the rush of late-afternoon commuters, but beneath it was something else, a subtle rhythm that did not belong to me. I boarded the downtown train and stood near the door, gripping the metal pole as the car rattled forward. 3 stops later, when I stepped onto the platform, I saw him. Not Dominic. One of the men from the diner. Dark suit. Calm expression. He did not approach me. He did not speak. He simply existed within the same space, eyes forward, as if coincidence were the most natural thing in the world. I felt heat rise to my face. This was not protection. This was surveillance. I climbed the stairs to street level and turned sharply, confronting him before I could lose my nerve. "Tell him this is not necessary," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. The man regarded me with professional neutrality. "Miss Bennett, my instructions are to ensure your safety." "From what?" I demanded. He did not answer. That silence felt rehearsed. I shook my head and walked away, refusing to let my steps betray frustration. By the time I reached my building, twilight had settled over the city, painting the sky in muted gray. I fumbled with my keys and pushed open the front door, only to freeze at the sight of a small figure sitting on the bottom stair inside the lobby. Ethan looked up when he heard me. His gray eyes were clearer today, less shadowed. He was bundled in a navy coat that looked far warmer than the sweater he had worn that night. "Hi," he said softly. I blinked. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He hesitated, glancing toward the glass door behind me. Through it, I could see the outline of the black SUV parked at the curb. My pulse quickened. "I wanted to give you something," he said, sliding off the stair and walking toward me. In his small hands was my coat. Clean, folded carefully. I stared at it, a mix of relief and something deeper stirring in my chest. He held it out like an offering. "Dad says thank you is important," he added. I took the coat slowly, my fingers brushing the wool. It was warmer than the air between us. "Your dad did not have to bring you all the way here," I said gently. Ethan shrugged. "He said you would not come to us." The honesty in his voice made my throat tighten. Behind him, the SUV door opened. Dominic stepped out, coat collar turned up against the wind, his expression unreadable but intent. He did not approach immediately. He gave me space, even now. I looked from Ethan to Dominic and back again, understanding settling in layers. This was not a gesture of control. It was persistence, measured, patient, and suddenly, I realized that walking away from him might not be as simple as turning a corner. For a long second, none of us moved. Ethan stood between us like a fragile bridge, my coat folded in his hands, Dominic watching from the curb as if he understood that one wrong step could undo something delicate. The wind swept down the street, sharp and restless, tugging at my hair and pressing cold through my sweater. I slipped my coat back on slowly, the familiar weight settling around my shoulders, and tried to ignore how symbolic it felt. "You could have mailed it," I said, keeping my voice even as I looked at Dominic. He closed the distance between us with measured steps, not rushed, not hesitant. I prefer to handle important matters personally, he replied. His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it. Not arrogance. Intention. Ethan glanced up at him, then back at me. Dad does not like unfinished things, he offered quietly. I almost smiled at that. I am not an unfinished thing, I said. Dominic's gaze met mine directly. No, he agreed. You are not. The streetlight above us flickered on as dusk settled fully into night. The SUV idled at the curb, engine low and steady, another black vehicle parked. Several yards behind it. I noticed everything now. The spacing, the timing, the way the city seemed to curve subtly around him without ever colliding. You should not be here, I said, glancing toward Ethan. If I am such a risk. You are not the risk, Dominic corrected gently. You are the variable I am protecting. That sounds like ownership again. His jaw tightened slightly, but he did not rise to the challenge. It sounds like responsibility, he said. The word hung in the air between us. Responsibility. I looked down at Ethan, who had taken a small step closer to me without realizing it. He was not afraid. Not the way he had been that night. His posture was more relaxed, his eyes clearer. Is he always this serious? I asked him softly. Ethan considered that, then nodded. Only when he is worried. I felt that answer in my chest. Dominic exhaled faintly, as if acknowledging defeat in some silent debate. Ethan, he said quietly, wait in the car. The boy hesitated for half a second, then obeyed, walking toward the SUV without argument. I watched him climb in before turning back to Dominic. The street suddenly felt wider without the child between us. You should not involve him in this, I said. He wanted to return your coat himself. That is not what I meant. Dominic studied me, reading the layers I was not saying out loud. You think proximity to me is harmful, he said. It was not a question. I think proximity to something I do not understand is dangerous, I replied. His eyes softened slightly at that. Then let me clarify. He stepped closer, but not enough to invade my space. Just enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle exhaustion beneath composure. There are people who monitor my movements, he said. When they saw you with Ethan, they took interest. Interest how? I asked, my pulse quickening again. Curiosity. Speculation. Nothing immediate. He held my gaze steadily. But curiosity grows. I swallowed. So your solution is to assign shadows to follow me? My solution is to prevent escalation. By making my life feel like surveillance. A faint flicker of frustration crossed his expression, but he controlled it quickly. I am not used to explaining my decisions, he admitted. That does not mean I do not value your perspective. That surprised me more than anything else he had said. I searched his face for insincerity and found none. Then listen to it, I said firmly. I do not want drivers. I do not want money. I do not want silent escorts on subway platforms. I want my choices to stay mine. The wind picked up again, carrying the distant hum of traffic. Dominic stood very still, absorbing every word. Finally, he nodded once. Then I will adjust. I blinked. Just like that. Just like that, he replied. But understand something, Claire. His voice lowered, not threatening, but resolute. If a line is crossed, I will not ask permission. My heartbeat stumbled. You do not get to decide that alone. His gaze held mine with quiet intensity. I already did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us, indifferent and alive. And as he turned to walk back toward the SUV, I realized something that unsettled me more than his power ever had. He was not trying to control me. He was trying to protect me in the only language he understood. The question was whether I could survive being fluent in it. I did not sleep much that night. The city outside my window sounded the same as it always did, distant traffic humming, a siren somewhere far off, the radiator tapping in uneven bursts. But everything felt slightly shifted, like the ground beneath my routine had tilted by a single degree. I kept replaying his words in my head. If a line is crossed, I will not ask permission. It was not a threat. It was a promise. And that difference mattered more than I wanted it to. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, sunlight barely filtering through the thin curtains. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself I could step back. I could redraw the boundary. I could insist on distance. But even as I thought it, I knew distance had already been complicated by a 6-year-old boy with gray eyes who had handed me back my coat like it meant something more than wool and thread. I was tying my hair into a low ponytail when my phone buzzed on the small kitchen table. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Claire Bennett, I said carefully. There was a pause, then a small, familiar voice. It is Ethan. I blinked. Ethan? Is everything okay? Yes, he said quickly. Dad does not know I called. That made my pulse quicken. He does not. He is in a meeting. Ethan continued in a whisper that sounded more conspiratorial than scared. I wanted to ask you something. I leaned against the counter, trying to ignore the way my heart softened at the edges. What is it? Do you know how to make pancakes? I almost laughed. Yes. I work at a diner. Dad tries, Ethan said seriously. But they are flat. The image of Dominic Hale standing in a kitchen attempting breakfast nearly broke my composure. Pancakes are supposed to be flat, I said gently. Not like paper, Ethan replied. I covered my mouth to hide a smile. Why are you calling me for pancake advice? There was a small silence on the other end. Because you are good at fixing things. The words settled deep. Not dramatic. Not complicated. Just honest. I do not fix everything, I said softly. You fix the cold, he answered. My chest tightened. Before I could respond, the line shifted slightly, like someone else had entered the room. Ethan's voice grew distant. I have to go. The call ended. I stood there for several seconds staring at my phone, the quiet of my apartment suddenly louder than before. He does not know I called. I was not naive enough to believe Dominic would truly be unaware. But the fact that Ethan felt safe enough to reach out mattered. It meant something was changing. By the time I stepped outside, the air was milder than it had been earlier in the week, just above freezing, the kind of cold that nipped instead of punished. I scanned the street automatically. No black sedan. No obvious shadows. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt strangely unsteady without that invisible perimeter. I walked to the subway without detouring, testing the promise he had made to adjust. No one followed me onto the platform. No familiar suits appeared in the reflection of the train window. For the first time in days, the city felt like mine again. When I arrived at the diner, Marco waved me over immediately. You have a delivery, he said, nodding toward the counter. A small brown paper bag sat there with my name written neatly across the top. My stomach dropped. Before I even touched it. I did not order anything, I said. Marco shrugged. Guy said it was prepaid. I opened the bag slowly. Inside was a clear plastic container. Perfectly round pancakes stacked 3 high, golden brown, edges slightly crisp, a small container of syrup sealed carefully beside them. No note. No card. Just breakfast. I stared at them, a mix of frustration and something warmer rising in equal measure. He had adjusted. No drivers. No shadows. No rent payments. Just pancakes. I shook my head, unable to stop the faint smile tugging at my mouth. He was learning my language, piece by piece. And whether I liked it or not, I was beginning to understand his. For 3 days, nothing happened. No black sedans. No silent figures at the edge of subway platforms. No anonymous transfers or folded cards with carefully chosen words. Just pancakes, once every morning, delivered before my shift, always warm, always perfectly round. I told myself it was harmless. A quiet gesture. An attempt at understanding. And I let it be that. By the 4th evening, I almost convinced myself that the tension I had felt earlier in the week had been exaggerated by imagination. The city was restless but ordinary, the sky a deep steel gray as I stepped out of the diner a little after 9. A light drizzle had begun, not heavy enough for an umbrella, just enough to gloss the sidewalks and blur the neon reflections in puddles. I pulled my coat tighter around me and started the walk home, replaying the small normal moments of the day. A regular who tipped well. Marco complaining about supply costs. Ethan's pancakes arriving with a slightly crispier edge, as if someone had adjusted the heat carefully. The rhythm of it steadied me. Halfway down West 46th, I felt it again. Not a sound. Not a voice. Just awareness. The subtle sense that the space behind me had weight. I slowed slightly, pretending to adjust the strap of my bag, and glanced at the reflection in a dark storefront window. A sedan I did not recognize had turned the corner moments after I did. It was not black. It was silver. Nondescript. The headlights remained steady, neither accelerating nor slowing. Coincidence, I told myself. The city is full of cars. I kept walking. The sedan rolled forward at the same measured pace. My heartbeat began to climb, not panicked, but alert. I turned onto a side street without signaling the shift in my thoughts. The drizzle thickened into something colder, tapping lightly against my hair. The sedan followed. That was when calm stopped feeling rational. I pulled out my phone, fingers steady despite the quickening in my chest. I did not call Dominic. I did not want to validate his warnings. Instead, I dialed Marco's number and let it ring once before ending the call, just enough to have it visible in my recent history. Then I pivoted sharply and crossed the street mid-block, heading toward a well-lit convenience store on the corner. The sedan slowed but did not stop. Its engine hummed quietly, tires gliding over wet pavement. No honking, no shouting, just presence. Inside the store, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I stood near the window, pretending to examine a rack of gum while watching the reflection. The silver sedan idled outside for 12 long seconds. Then it pulled away. Not fast, not abrupt, just gone. I exhaled slowly, tension draining in layers. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Dominic's caution had planted suspicion where none belonged. I waited another minute before stepping back onto the sidewalk. The rain had steadied, fine and persistent. I made it half a block before a different vehicle eased up beside the curb. Black. Familiar. The rear passenger door opened smoothly. Dominic stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, his expression unreadable but intent. "Get in," he said quietly. Not forceful, not raised. Certain. I stared at him, irritation and relief colliding inside me. "You said you adjusted," I replied. Water beaded on his coat, sliding down the dark fabric. "I did," he said evenly. "Until I received a call." My stomach tightened. "What call?" His eyes scanned the street once before returning to mine. "The kind that confirms you were not imagining that car." My pulse stumbled. "You were watching anyway." "No," he corrected calmly. "Someone else was." The words landed heavier than the drizzle soaking through my sleeves. I looked down the street, half expecting the silver sedan to reappear. It did not. "Who?" I asked softly. Dominic's jaw set, not in anger, but in calculation. "Someone curious." The same word he had used before. Curiosity grows. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear over the rain. "You wanted your choices to remain yours. So choose." He held the open door steady, rain sliding down the frame. "Stand here and hope curiosity fades. Or get in and let me end it before it becomes something else." My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I looked at the empty street, then back at him. For the first time, his composure cracked just slightly. Not fear. Concern. Not for himself. For me. And I realized that walking away now would not restore normal. It would only remove the one person who seemed prepared for what was coming. I stepped forward, the scent of rain and leather meeting me as I crossed the threshold into his world. The door closed with a soft, decisive sound that seemed louder than it should have been. The world outside blurred instantly as the tinted window sealed me inside warmth and muted light. The rain still traced slow lines down the glass, but it no longer touched me. Dominic slid into the seat beside me, not crowding, not reaching, simply present. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something clean, understated. The driver did not turn around. The engine shifted smoothly as the car pulled away from the curb. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched the city pass in distorted streaks, familiar buildings suddenly distant behind darkened glass. "You could have told me," I said finally, keeping my voice steady. "About the call." Dominic rested his forearm along the seat, posture composed but alert. "You would have refused," he replied. He did not say it with frustration. He said it with certainty. I turned toward him. "I do not like being maneuvered." "I am not maneuvering you," he said calmly. "I am removing options that involve risk. That is still deciding for me." His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. "No," he said quietly. "You decided when you stepped into this car." The truth of that settled between us. I had chosen. Not because he ordered it. Not because I was afraid. Because standing in the rain pretending I could outpace something larger than myself felt foolish. The car slowed as we approached a tall building on a quieter avenue. Subtle. Elegant. No flashy signage. Just controlled privacy. The gates opened without hesitation. The vehicle rolled into an underground garage lit by clean white lights that reflected off polished concrete. When the engine cut, the silence felt deliberate. Dominic stepped out first and walked around to open my door. The gesture was old-fashioned, precise. Not possessive. Considered. I hesitated before taking his offered hand. His fingers were warm, steady, calloused in a way that contradicted the tailored suit. He did not tighten his grip. He simply supported until my feet touched the ground. You do not have to stay, he said once we were inside the elevator alone. The doors closed softly, sealing us in a mirrored box that reflected two versions of the same moment. But I need you somewhere secure tonight. Secure from curiosity, I replied. He nodded once. The elevator rose smoothly, numbers lighting up in quiet progression. My reflection looked smaller beside him, but not diminished. Just different. The doors opened into a private floor. The space beyond was understated but expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, lights from across the water blinking in steady rhythm. The kind of place designed for someone who needed both visibility and control. I stepped forward slowly, taking in the quiet. No clutter. No unnecessary decoration. Just intention. Ethan is asleep, Dominic said, as if anticipating my first concern. He will not know you are here unless you wish it. I turned toward him. I am not hiding. A faint flicker touched his expression. Approval again. Good. I walked closer to the window, looking out at the city that had felt so much larger an hour ago. Tell me the truth, I said without turning around. Am I in danger? Silence lingered just long enough to feel honest. Not tonight, he answered. And not while you are with me. I faced him then. That is not the same as never. His jaw tightened slightly, but he did not look away. There is no never in my world. The admission did not frighten me as much as it should have. It grounded him, made him human in a way the suits and vehicles could not. I crossed my arms loosely, studying him. If I stay, I said carefully, it is not because you command it. It is because I choose to understand what I stepped into. His gaze sharpened, something intense but restrained moving beneath the surface. I do not want obedience, he said quietly. I want alignment. The word surprised me. And if I disagree? I asked. Then we negotiate, he replied without hesitation. I searched his face for control disguised as compromise. I found none. Just a man accustomed to authority learning how to temper it for someone who refused to be managed. The city lights reflected in his eyes, steady and bright. You told me kindness gets people killed, I said softly. Sometimes, he answered. Then maybe it also changes them, I replied. For the first time, the intensity in his expression shifted into something unguarded. Not weakness, not surrender, recognition. It already has, he said quietly. And in that moment, standing high above the river with the rain still tracing the glass behind us, I understood that protection was no longer the only thing binding our worlds together. The night felt suspended, as if the city itself were holding its breath. I stood by the window long after our words settled, watching rain streak down the glass in silver threads. Dominic remained a few feet behind me, close enough that I could sense him, far enough that I did not feel cornered. The distance was deliberate, respectful. I turned slowly. What happens tomorrow? I asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight. Tomorrow meant daylight. Routine. My apartment. The diner. Pancakes on a counter instead of a polished marble island. Dominic did not hesitate. Tomorrow, you return to your life, he said. With adjustments. I lifted a brow. That sounds suspiciously like strategy. A faint hint of something almost playful crossed his expression. It is. He walked toward the kitchen, poured a glass of water, then handed it to me without comment. The gesture was ordinary, grounding. The vehicle tonight confirmed curiosity, he continued. It did not escalate beyond observation. Observation feels like a beginning, I replied quietly. He met my gaze. It is. Which means we shape it before it shapes us. I absorbed that. His world did not react. It anticipated. It calculated 3 steps ahead. Mine survived day to day. The contrast should have intimidated me. Instead, it clarified something. You are not trying to cage me, I said slowly. You are trying to stay ahead of something. Yes, he answered simply. No pride. No apology. Just truth. I walked across the room, closing the distance until only a few inches separated us. Then hear me clearly, I said. I am not a weakness you need to hide. His jaw tightened. Slightly, but not defensively. You are not a weakness, he replied. You are leverage. I inhaled sharply. He continued before I could react. Leverage works both ways. Anyone who believes you compromise me would miscalculate. That miscalculation benefits us. I studied him carefully. So, I am part of your equation. You are part of my decision, he corrected. The distinction mattered. I let out a slow breath. And what if I decide I do not want to be? The air between us stilled. He did not step closer. He did not reach for me. He simply held my gaze with an intensity that felt earned. Then I walk you back to your apartment, he said quietly. And I ensure no one mistakes your kindness for access. My pulse softened at that. Not because of control. Because of choice. It had always been there. I had just needed to see it clearly. I glanced toward the hallway where he had said Ethan was asleep. Does he know? I asked softly. About your world? Dominic followed my gaze. He knows enough to be careful, he said. But not enough to lose his childhood. That answer told me more about him than any display of power ever could. A man who could command silence in a room still measured what his son was allowed to see. I stepped back toward the window, city lights reflecting across the glass like scattered constellations. If I stay tonight, I said carefully, it is not surrender. I do not want surrender, he replied. I want partnership. The word lingered. Unexpected. Powerful. I faced him fully. Then tomorrow, I go to work, I said. Alone. His eyes narrowed slightly in consideration. With distance, he amended. Not absence. I almost smiled. We negotiate, I reminded him. A pause. Then a single nod. We negotiate. Silence fell again, but it felt different now. Not tense. Balanced. Outside, the rain began to taper, droplets thinning against the glass. I watched as the clouds shifted, faint city glow pushing through. Somewhere below, traffic resumed its steady rhythm. The world had not ended because I stepped into his car. It had not collapsed because someone watched from a silver sedan. It had simply changed its shape. I turned toward him one last time that night. You said there is no never in your world, I said quietly. Then let there be intention. His expression softened in a way that felt rare, almost unguarded. There is, he said. From the moment you chose not to walk away. I felt the weight of that truth settle inside me, steady instead of overwhelming. He ruled rooms without raising his voice. He moved cities without leaving fingerprints. But tonight, standing in quiet light high above the river, I realized something neither of us had planned. He could command the city, but I had changed the way he chose within it. And that was not leverage. That was alignment.